Greetings. I am Ted Mashburn, Professor of Humanities, and am delighted to welcome you to the University of Mobile. Now, we're doing something different today because A, I can't be 7 places at one time. B, I don't want to give this lecture 7 times. And C, we have an award-winning film director, one Trey Talby, on staff now. For those reasons, we're going to try something different. We're coming to you live from Martin Hall, and we will do this lecture, and hopefully we'll see what happens. Now, you have joined a great society of learners that stretches all the way back to, some would say, 5th century BC, if Nalanda University in India is our oldest institution of higher learning. You have been in college, I think a month, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. This is an exciting, as well as a formative period of your life. I am a philosopher. What do philosophers do? We ask questions, fundamental questions, essential questions, really big questions. So the question I have for you today is this: what is the university? What is this thing that you have joined and will pay a significant amount of money in order to be a participant? Now, I have good news and bad news. You and approximately 60% of all high school seniors have decided to go to college. That's the good news. The bad news is that only 41% of those who start 4-year public universities will get a degree within 5 years. But the good news is that nearly 56% of those who start 4-year private universities will get a degree. Now, what do you make of those statistics, particularly you mathematicians out there in the audience? Well, you are in a select group. That is, you're in college. And you have improved your chances of graduation significantly by coming to this university. Actually, you've improved them by 15%. But back to our question. What is the university? Now, I'm not talking specifically about the University of Mobile. Your group leaders are going to tell you everything you want to know about the University of Mobile, maybe even more. But what is the university in general? Now, this is a fascinating question, and I want you to think with me over the next several minutes. There are many ways of addressing this answer, but let's begin with an etymological answer. University comes from Old English, an Old English word, universite, which comes from a medieval Latin phrase, universitas magistrorum et scholarium. Now, your 5th grade, you will remember from your 5th grade Latin that it means society, universite, of masters and students, magistrorum et scholarium. Now, the word comes into English usage around 1300 AD and refers to a collection of scholars and students in a place of instruction where degrees are conferred. In one way or another, universities have been around since, as we said, the 5th century BC. If in fact we understand a university in the broadest sense of being a place that trains students to read, write, speak, and do simple mathematical computations. Every civilization has developed some means of educating its people. Now, what I'm going to do in the next 20 minutes is to give a brief overview of the history of education in the Western tradition. Now, here's our question. What is the Western tradition? And we're not talking Arizona here. The Western tradition. It is a collection of what? Laws, music, philosophy, art, theology, architecture, government, and literature that begins somewhere in ancient Mesopotamia and Israel and develops through Athens and Rome, ruminates in the countries of Western Europe before immigrating in piecemeal fashion to the American colonies, which became the United States of America. Along the way, this tradition was influenced by Africa, Central and South America. It is above all a Christian tradition, advancing the story of a personal God who seeks communion with everyone. Now, there are three main elements to this great tradition. Judeo-Christian, actually our school is devoted to that. The Greek tradition and the Roman. Let's look more deeply into this great Western tradition. We'll isolate forms of education and identify some ideas which bear on our topic, which is the development of the university. What is the university? In ancient Greece, 7th century BC on, Greek boys ages 6 to 13 were subject to strenuous physical training. Running, jumping, boxing, wrestling, discus, javelin throwing, and so forth. Now, why do you think that is? It's a very, very practical answer here. Boxing, wrestling, discus. Yeah, that's correct. They were being prepared to be soldiers. In addition, they had to memorize the great two Homeric poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Now, why do you suppose they had to memorize these poems? We got any answers out there? Precisely. Books were nearly impossible to come by. There were no Barnes & Noble, no Books A Million, Amazon.com was not up and running yet. And so, usually there might be one book, and everybody had to learn it, memorize it. After the age of 13, formal education for poorer boys ended. Wealthier ones continued under the supervision of philosophers, teachers. The main subjects were music, very, very important. Actually, music teachers were really teachers of literature. Do you know why? Because poems were accompanied by music. And think about it. They're easier to remember if you have music. In other words, you might struggle to memorize a sonnet of Keats, but if you have a song, you can memorize the lyrics in a matter of minutes. So, music was always great literature. In addition to music, they had to learn grammar, that was reading, writing, and arithmetic, and gymnastics. Greeks not only believed in preparing students for war, but there was this correlation between a healthy body and a healthy mind. And from age 15 and on, the students were schooled in speech, rhetoric, and philosophy. Now, this brings us to the three greatest philosophers in Greece. And some would argue the three greatest philosophers in the history of ideas. Socrates, the date you'll see, his student Plato, and his student Aristotle. Now, from time to time, we'll chase a rabbit. Now, here's a toss-up question. Your seminar leaders have 100 points, and they will give it to the student who can correctly identify Aristotle's greatest student. So, for 100 points, who is Aristotle's greatest student? Greatest student, that is. Yes, we'll see if you get that. Alexander the Great. We call these three great philosophers, in short, the philosophical trinity. The great 20th century British philosopher, Alfred Whitehead, wrote that, quote, "The safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. Now that's the phrase. Western philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato. What does that mean? Well, I'm glad you asked. It means that really Plato set the agenda for all subsequent philosophical thought. He raised the right questions, identified the right issues, and provided the proper reflection to those areas. That's why we're still reading him today. Now this brings us to Plato's masterpiece, the Republic, in which he describes the ideal city, the just city. He literally creates a city in words. He tells how it ought to be governed, the policies the city should pursue, how education should take place, who should rule, and how the city should achieve justice. Now remember, this text was written between 380 370 BC, nearly 2,400 years ago. Why is the Republic so great? Well, the whole book represents a vision. It's important that you remember that. It is a vision. It was never put into practice, though parts of it have been tried. It still remains a vision somewhat akin to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. You know, what? Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, turn the other cheek, beware of practicing your religion before others, judge not, seek spiritual, not material things. Now, let me throw out some grenades. Here are some of the most innovative, progressive, and radical parts of Plato's vision, and you might wish to talk about some of these at length. Here's the first one. Rulers, kings, should be philosophers. Well, since I have a vested interest in that, no comment. Number two, equality of sexes. In Plato's city, women can do anything men can do. Did you get that? 2,400 years ago, Plato's preaching equality. Any job a man could do, a woman could do. Hey, I've got another question for you. Here are another 100 points. When did you women get the right to vote? For 100 points. When did you get the right to vote in this country? The third grenade, critical thinking. Plato devotes nearly a whole chapter instructing people how to read critically. Young minds, he says, are not capable to discriminate between what is allegorical and what is literal. Do you know what he means by that? Discriminating between that which is symbolical or allegorical and literal. Well, you're going to find out in college. Number four, oh, I love this. He connects music to morality. CPA majors, pay attention. He goes so far as to say certain rhythms, harmonies, and melodies are good for the psyche, the soul, and some are absolutely harmful and should be banished from the city. You hear that? Some rhythms, some harmonies, some melodies should not be a part of the city. Fifth, he asked a very probing question about ethics, and I'll put it this way. He says, why be ethical? If you could steal $1 million and get away with it, never be caught, would you do it? Well, that's his question in the ring of Gyges, which you will encounter somewhere along your way. Finally, ultimate reality is spiritual, not physical. Plato understands what every religion I have ever studied understands, and that is this. Within and beyond the temporal, tangible world lies a reality that is more important than any other reality. In an aside, Augustine took Plato's idea of the good and baptized it, made it Christian, thus making perhaps the most important contribution to Christian thought in the history of Christianity. You theologians out there will learn this. Okay, let's go to the Roman period. 500 BCE to 500 C. In the early Roman period, most education was provided by the family. Mothers were in charge of the education of the young children. After that, girls were taught how to run a home, be a mother, and take care of the household, while the fathers taught the boys utilizing a kind of apprentice method. The boy went with the father on his daily rounds and observed it. In addition, the boy was required to memorize certain laws in the laws of the 12 tables. Now, you might want to take a time out here and look at those laws and comment. They're really, really interesting. Some of them are kind of terrible, but I want you to get a feel for what these young lads had to learn. Some boys of prominent families served internships in various offices of the Roman government. Schools began to develop sometime after 300 BCE. Girls and boys ages 7 through 12 were taught to read and write Latin. Secondary schools, only available to boys, taught Greek and Latin grammar and literature. In addition, the Romans developed the great schools of rhetoric. In Greece, these were called philosophical schools. Subjects to be mastered included literature, rhetoric, logic, geometry, astronomy, music, physics, law, and philosophy. Education was for the primary purpose of public service. Cicero, the great Roman orator, believed that the ability to speak and to persuade was fundamental to professional life. He thought education should be well-rounded and very, very practical. Now I've got 7 quotations that you can look at and perhaps reflect upon briefly. Your group leaders will take you through those 7 quotations. But what I want you to see, there's a major difference between Greek and Roman education. Roman education was always very practical, while Greek education was very speculative. The old adage is true. While the Greeks built speculative metaphysical systems, the Romans built roads and established laws. So from the Greeks and Romans, we have both the theoretical, philosophical side of education as well as the practical, professional side. These sides are still represented in colleges and universities today. Most universities have a College of Arts and Sciences, the theoretical, philosophical side, as well as professional schools like education, business, nursing, and so forth, the practical side. I hope by now you have noticed something very, very important. What the Western tradition deemed as important in education, we still value. If you look at the core curriculum at the University of Mobile, you will note an uncanny resemblance to what has been studied since the inception of formal education. What the Greeks and Romans have left us with is not only a great system of education, but great books, which brings me to my last images. Now, for 100 points, who can tell me what person this is or who this is? Now, you got to look at him carefully. He probably was on before you were even born. Yes. You've seen the reruns, haven't you? It's the soup Nazi. Now let me connect a couple of dots here. What does the soup Nazi have to do with me or with you? Well, some of you might know I'm Associate Dean of College of Arts and Sciences. Among other things, it means that at graduation, I am there to call out names and to assist with handing out diplomas. Now, if you will notice carefully, you have to go behind these red curtains before you come out on the podium to receive your diploma. Well, back there, we have a list. And we'll have all of these books you shall have read. I think Mr. Talby read them. Plato's Dialogues, Augustine's Confessions, Aquinas' Summa Theologica, Shakespeare. And we'll be back there asking, did you read these? Did you read? And if you say no, well, we say, no diploma for you. You have to go back to the end of the line and you start all over. Your parents will be in tears. What can we say about all of this? So here's the point. In order to avoid the diploma Nazi, you have to make sure all of these wonderful books are read, and who knows, you might get an education in so doing. Curtains that close.